Well, welcome everybody to the Monday Masterclass, this time on outcome statements. And my colleague Scott Burleson is going to be doing most of the heavy lifting. He's a master of this stuff. In fact, Scott, you used to do this. This is your living. You used to go out and interview people all the time, right?
I did. We did this. Well, I did this even back when I was with John Deere, where I first kind of learned about the approach, and then we did it at Stratogen, and then just with really every career stop after that. And it's one of these topics I just kind of, I don't know, I just kind of I just really enjoy going deeper and deeper, and it's an exercise in writing. And yeah, it's something that I don't know, I guess I've been pursuing it, for like what 13, 14 years now. I'm still trying to get better at it.
Well, we're glad you're going to be taken through this material. I mean, we talked about this a little bit before, but if you don't get the outcome statements right, a lot of things don't go well for the project. We've seen this. It gets a lot harder to prepare for preference interviews. The preference interviews don't make as much sense. We're kind of missing some really important points of what the real value is for the customer. We don't probe as well. When you get to the side-by-side testing, things get really bad. It's almost like, when you're building a house, you want to get that footer poured level and you want to get your block straight. Well, that's the outcome statement. So before we turn it over to you, Scott, why don't I do this? I will go on a brief tour of some of the Blue Help. We have some fundamentals here, and I call them fundamentals. Most people can learn from these, but I'm going to go fairly quickly, and then we're going to turn it over to you, the master, and get a little bit more on these outcome statements. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. As always, we're going to keep this very informal. If you have any questions, you just holler out whenever you have them. Usually we try to get through the material in 30 minutes and save 30 minutes for Q&A. We've got a lot to pack in this time. We might spill a little bit over. Let's see how it goes, but anytime you feel free to jump in and ask a question. So let me do this. I'm going to get out of here, and we don't need this anymore. And let me go ahead and resume share. And hopefully you can all see the Blueprinting Center here. Let's just go into Blue Help. Almost everything we cover at these Monday morning classes, we've got at least some fairly helpful information here you should start with here. So let's say you want to learn about outcome statements. You could go ahead and type in outcome statement. And there we have it. We're going to go to this step 2 here, optimizing, creating, and so forth. So that's one way of getting there. The other way is just look through this, and you can see we're going to be in discovery interviews. This isn't bad to get familiar with this. So if we go down here, we're in discovery interviews here. We cover a lot of the basics of getting ready for discovery and how to conduct them and yada, yada, yada. And then we get down further in here, after we get through things like trade shows and global cultures, we get into probing, and then we go through creating current state, must-have, topics. We kind of go through that. And then down at the very bottom here, we got more on the outcome statements, because that's usually when you form your outcome statements at the end of the interview. So let's take a look at this article. That's the one I could have gone to just with my search. So first of all, take a look at this when you get a chance. You may be already there. We talk about this at the workshop. Just be real clear on what an outcome is, what a solution is, what a background is. The outcomes, if you want to know a little bit more about this, check this out. They're going to have obvious value. You go, oh, I see why they'd want that. It's generally going to be stable over time. They'll want this thing for a long time. This is a really important one. It's unambiguous. If somebody says, ooh, I want a durable packaging container. Well, if durable means different things to different people, we got to probe and say, what do you mean by durable? And then measurable. Could we get to the point where, oh yeah, I could, if they meant by durable abrasion resistant, could I imagine a test that measures abrasion resistance? I could at least imagine at this point. I don't need to nail it down during the discovery interview. And then this, you may remember, is on the back side of your discovery interview quick start card. When you hear background, any problems, when you hear solutions, what would that do for you? And then we're really working here on this outcome statement, something that originally was created by Tony Alwyn. All right, so that is the one article I wanted you to be aware of. But also right here, creating outcome statements. Here you're going to see there's a couple of ways of doing this. Well, first of all, this is out of the workshop. Some tips, if you can start with minimize or maximize, it's a good way to try to begin this. And there's a couple ways of doing it. Record as you go. And as you get more experience, you may want to do more and more of this. Our recommendation is when you're getting started, take some pressure off yourself and work on those outcome statements after you have identified the top picks. Okay, so that is generally something that's good to do. And then there's a little bit more on how you do this. You actually type over in this area here. I'll show you that in just a jiffy. Okay, the last article, I know I'm going through these quickly, but I just want you to see what's in here, optimizing your outcome statements. So here, this is where we really want to work at some of these rules. Don't put a solution in there. Don't combine two outcomes. Again, stay away from these fuzzy words, these ambiguous words that can mean multiple things. When we see easy to use, high performance, streamlined, durable, like that means different things to different people. So we need to do some more probing before we leave that one alone. Okay, that's it for the Blue Help. You guys can spend more time looking at that later. Let's just take a real quick look at the software and then we'll turn Scott loose here. So I'm gonna open up my software from here. It's always good to go into this demo to see how things are filled out all the way. I'll zoom that up a little bit. And let me go ahead and maximize this so we can see it. Let's go grab a discovery interview. If any of you guys do some coaching of your teammates, you might want to check out this Tesco down at the bottom. I created this one because it does not have the outcome statements created yet. So it's a nice demo. So go hit Tesco. And this has been filled in, but they haven't got the top picks selected yet. So if this is a real interview, the must-haves would probably be marked as we go through. The top picks would be selected somewhere, usually at the end of the interview, either informally or even by voting, raising hands. And then now at this point, this is the method of getting your outcome statements after the top picks. Once those TPs are selected, you click on top picks, and then you look at each one of these. And of course, whatever was here is up here. So if you're in the 36 per page view, you can still read it. But what we're going to do is this is where we put the outcome statements. We'll put something in here, minimize box damage from moisture. Now, that's again something we'd have to check with the customer. Only the customer knows what these really are. It capitalizes automatically. You don't have to do that. So don't start typing in this top box until you're ready for top picks, because that's my signal now that I'm done with this note, but I still have to work on the other ones. So let me just take a pause before we turn this over to Scott. Any questions on some of those Blue Help matters or some of the mechanics of the interview here so far? Well, Scott, I've done some really hard work here today, so I'm going to stop working and I'm going to turn you loose on this and let you take us through some of the mastery of outcome statements, some of the things you've learned over the years that have really helped you a lot.
Yeah, you bet. So let me see if I can share my screen without hurting myself. And let's see. Am I sharing?
You betcha. And that's you in the boat there, right?
That is me. I'm struggling.
Okay.
Whoops.
All right.
Whoops, that way. Wait, hold on. Sorry. It's this card. Don't mind the man behind the curtain. There we go. Okay, so yeah, so thanks, Dan. And so, yeah, you know, it's interesting. Every now and then a team will call me and they'll say, you know, we just did a preference interview and it didn't go very well. The customers had a hard time with the questions. And look, the questions, the lead-ins are the same. You know, how important is this to you and how satisfied are you with your ability to? It's not the questions. Whenever they say that, I know with 99.999% certainty, it's really the issue is that the outcome statements are not worded well. The outcome statements are worded well, then the preference interview goes very well. So let's back up a little bit. What is an outcome statement? So it's the problem a customer wants to solve. It's the need, the customer need, as opposed to a product or an attribute. And I'm going to turn on my little highlighter right here. Whoops. Not the pen, the highlighter. So it's the outcome statements. They are the criteria that customers use, yes, to determine how well a job is done, but also it's the criteria they're going to use to select between one product or another product. And by the way, an interesting question during discovery interview is, why would you select product A over B? Why would you choose a rowboat as opposed to a motorboat? If you ask those questions, why would you choose A over B? You'll always get very close to an outcome. And so when I mention a job, that's what the customer is wanting to accomplish. So their job to be done. I've got this acronym here. So in this case, if we wanted to cross a river, right? We wanted to cross a river, you know, what would be some of the outcomes we would have? What are some of the criteria we would use that would evaluate our method of crossing a river? Well, we probably don't want to drown. We probably want to get across that river quickly. We might want to carry a lot of stuff with us. This is where I reveal my laziness. I like to minimize the physical energy required. I don't want to run aground. I don't want to get lost. I don't want to lose anything in the water. And we start thinking about all these things that could go wrong. If we can minimize these errors, we can see what this job to be done, executed perfectly, is all about. And that's kind of the mentality we're going to get into. Now, by the way, also anybody you can, I think you were muted when you came in, but certainly feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question at any time. But I introduced this one here at the bottom, minimize the time to start the engine. So I'll just ask you guys, there's a little something different about that outcome. What is that?
That assumes you already have a solution.
It does. It presumes there is some engine. There is an engine of a solution, right? And that's not necessarily bad. It really gets back to the scope of your project. But we always want to identify when we have solutions in there. We want to be very intentional about adding those. I'll give some more information about that here shortly. So let's look at the minimum requirements for outcome statements. So every outcome statement must meet these minimum requirements. We must begin with a verb. You'll find that maximize or minimize work best. Okay, you have to begin with the verb. We need something measurable. Time, frequency, likelihood, number. Those are all very common ones. And here we want to be as solution independent as possible. More on that later. Just as Dan mentioned, we want to avoid combining two outcomes with an and. We don't want to minimize the likelihood of drowning and minimize the likelihood of hypothermia due to getting wet. Yeah, we want to reduce both of those, but they're distinct things. We want to understand how a customer might rate each of those. And if we combine with an and, then we've lost that ability to learn that. Now, we also want them to be interpreted the same by all stakeholders. Now, who are these stakeholders? These are our customers. These are our engineers and our software developers. These are our marketing communication folks later. We want a statement that everybody interprets the same. So minimize the likelihood of running aground. I think we would all interpret that the exact same. Now, so those are the minimum requirements. Now, what are the qualities of the best outcome statement? You'll generally find that minimize will be the better verb, And it's because we're reducing errors, we're eliminating errors. If that's a little confusing, we'll set that in our parking lot. I'm coming back around to that. I'll come back around to that on our next slide. Now, it turns out that some things are more measurable than others. Frequency is a more measurable thing than likelihood, for example. We do end up using likelihood a lot, often because we don't have anything very measurable. But when we're writing outcome statements, really let's challenge ourselves to how could we find something more measurable. I mean, right here, as I'm looking at, I can always look at an outcome and think of how it might not be the best. I look at this one, maximize the cargo that can be carried. Well, as I'm looking at this right now, I'm thinking that is that weight of the cargo? Is that the volume of the cargo? This outcome statement in my example could definitely be improved. And
Hey, Scott.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead. I think we had a good question come up here. Can you see the
Sure.
question there?
Oh, sorry, I did not see the question.
No, go ahead. Yeah. I'll read it here. If minimize the time to cross a river is identified as a top pick, wouldn't we want to know what influences the time? And when should this information be gathered? I like that. Go ahead, Scott.
It's a great question. It's a great question. And so we have an outcome, and then so think of the outcome for the purposes of this question as a problem statement. Now, has anybody has ever done a fishbone diagram? Like you can have like a main problem, and then you can break that problem down into root causes. You're referring to the root causes. What is making this process slow? And this is one of the things that's so wonderful about blueprinting and blueprinter software. Let me explain. If you give me just 1 minute to go into this, it's a great question. Imagine that you just completed a survey. You used to do lots of surveys, and you would often get, whatever the top couple outcomes were. Let's imagine it's minimize the time to cross the river. But then we would have this exact question that our person is asking. Well, what is causing that? Well, within blueprinting, we hopefully have that captured within that discovery interview note. So when you're getting the outcome, that's exactly the question to ask yourself. Do we have those root causes within the discovery note? Now, yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So in this case, Scott, let's say you're in a discovery interview, so he said, wow, I wish we could cross the river faster. You would probably then probe and say, no, that's great. You get it, you just record that. Now, what's preventing you from crossing the river quickly now? Is that how you would approach that?
Right, exactly. What's slowing you down? What makes that slow?
Right in the discovery interview, Kevin, to answer your question. Excellent.
That's right. Great question. Great question. Now, I say the qualities of the best have zero solution references, but I had that engine one before. So it does depend a little bit on your scope. If you work for Mercury Motors and you're really wanting to understand issues around the engine, you'll probably refer to the engine. Now, I love back to our questioner. Our questioner has a due to in there that describes the root cause. Well, look at this one. What if I just had minimized the likelihood of hypothermia and I stopped there? Well, I don't know if I'm getting cold in the boat, but exactly to that question, here I have a due to getting wet. And I might have more details about that as well. But I love seeing a due to in an outcome statement when we really are talking about one specific root cause. If there's lots of root causes, lots really being two or more, then you probably don't have this due to. You end with the minimized likelihood of hypothermia, and you have all the root causes within the note. But if there really is one primary root cause, consider putting it right in there. Minimize the likelihood of hypothermia due to getting wet. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that, Scott. So if you really were concerned about hypothermia from the weather, from rain, and really concerned about hypothermia from waves washing over and getting wet, and you really want to know, you'd have two outcome statements in your preference interviews, right?
Exactly right. And you very well might have a couple here. Mm-hmm. Great. And then my last one is just about concise. There's no reason for it to be wordier than it needs to be. And something to think about, it really is an exercise in writing. And people who enjoy writing will probably fall into this a lot better than if it was not, if you absolutely hated writing in school or whatever. So it is an exercise in writing. All right, I will continue, and please, then if I'm not, stop me if there's any questions along the way that I'm.
Sure, I'll watch the questions here.
Now, this next point, if you're new to writing outcome statements, then maybe you can just not worry about this so much, because I promise you, I have confused thousands of people in this next point. But if you've been in the game a while, I do think it's kind of something important. It's this idea of having jobs-based outcomes versus product-based. And let me show you what I mean. And my background with John Deere was with tractors, and so my brain is kind of always in that world. So forgive me for this John Deere type example. For the job to be done of mow the lawn, I have all these outcomes about mowing the lawn. Minimize the time to mow the lawn, minimize the number of grass clumps remaining on the lawn, not the lawn. And look, John Deere has engineers that are right now on their hands and knees on a lawn somewhere looking at each little tiny piece of grass. It's kind of funny. Minimize the number of uncut strips of grass, etc. Now, but notice I'm not actually referring to a solution, and that was a deliberate decision made when scoping this project as mow the lawn. But I could absolutely define this solution with the lawn tractor, but look at how some of these outcomes, how it changes the outcomes a bit. Now I've got minimize the time to learn to use the tractor, minimize the space required to store the tractor, minimize the time required to maintain the tractor, minimize the likelihood of injury while using the tractor. So it really comes, your outcome statements are absolutely going to be tied to the scope of your project. And so again, if that's confusing, don't worry about it. We can talk about that one-on-one later. But the main difference is if you've defined a solution as part as within scope, then it's okay to refer to changing the blades, for example. But if you want to stay at a higher level, maybe you want to think about robot mowers or whatever, then maybe you want to keep a little at a higher level of purity, if you will, and just stick to the job to be done to mow the lawn. So this is a conversation during scoping. So I won't elaborate that a lot because again, I've confused thousands of people before, but I do think it's an important issue. But
Scott, one thing you and I have talked about is the more we've noticed teams get into the mental space of thinking about the customer's job to be done, and the less they're in the mental space of thinking about their product, generally the better they do, right? In the front end of innovation.
Absolutely, because ultimately this is what the customer wants to do. They want to mow the lawn, but even in the word mow, you have a little bit of a solution embedded in that word. So it really comes back to the scope of your project. Longer term, more strategic projects, you're going to stay more solution independent. Shorter term, hey, the task that's been given to us is to build a next generation lawn tractor, then it's probably kind of important to understand changing the blades or avoiding injuries or maintenance, storage, learning to use, etc. Yeah, all right, so we'll move on from there. Now, if you're wondering why there's a statue of David here, this is about a mentality of outcome statements. And this is from a story. It's probably not true and apocryphal, but it's useful, so I'll tell it anyway. So that's a statue of David, one of the probably half dozen most well-known works of art in the world, certainly from the Renaissance. And when Michelangelo was revealing the statue of David to the world, the Pope walked by and was just astonished by this work of art. And he looked at it and the Pope asked Michelangelo, well, how did you create something so perfect? And supposedly anyway, Michelangelo said, I just looked at the stone and I carved away everything that was not David. Now, if you'll think about just what Dan just said, we want to help a customer to accomplish their job perfectly, to cross the river perfectly, to mow the lawn perfectly, or to mow the lawn as fast as possible, whatever. We want to really focus on, be obsessed with every imperfection, these things that are keeping the customer from accomplishing that as well as possible. And I personally found that to be a useful way of thinking. Writing outcome statements, it's a pursuit of finding imperfections. Exactly as our questioner asked a while ago, what are the root causes of what's going wrong here? And I've been so obsessed with this that I pulled this together in a book called Statue in the Stone, but about decoding customer motivation. But it really goes into a lot more detail about just the mentality of a jobs to be done way of thinking. Now, I'll say this, for the vast majority of blueprinting practitioners, that you really don't need this depth. But for the few of you who find this to be very interesting, I do think this will inform your efforts and help you be better outcome gatherers. I would make the book free if I could. Amazon will let me do that a couple of times a year, but right now I think the Kindle version is about $4.
By the way, I do highly recommend it. I thought I had the whole outcomes, job to be done thing pretty well nailed down, but there were some really useful laws in there. And just going through it really helped me with the mindset a lot, Scott. So I strongly recommend this book.
Well, thank you for that, Dan. That's kind. People ask me, why did you write it? And the reason is I wrote it to wrap my own brain around this so I could better, it had to make sense so I could understand it better. So hopefully others will find that useful as well. Now, with that in mind, for some reason, this one's on my mind a lot. I was on vacation last week, and plus I've got the COVID-19 going here. But for the job you've done of losing weight, what are all the things that could go wrong with that? Man, I might gain it back. I want to do it quickly. I don't want to be hungry. I don't want to suffer from low energy while losing weight. And that's the reason when we identify those errors, these things going wrong, that minimize in practice often, not always, but minimize is often the best verb to use, because it's that mentality of reducing imperfections, minimizing imperfections. For the job to be done, prepare a meal. What have we got? We don't want to burn the meal. We want to get those ingredients quickly. We don't make an error when measuring the ingredients. So it's almost like a personality trait, by the way. When I'm cooking stuff, I just throw stuff in there. My wife, she will measure 1/8 of a teaspoon or something. But we're using different solutions, trying to estimate. But we still have the same error we're concerned about. And again, it's about minimizing these errors. So it's because we're about reducing imperfections is the reason why minimize will usually be the best. When you're looking over your outcomes later, if you have more maximizes than minimizes, that's one little tip that you might want to revisit your statements. Now, this is just a look now that we've kind of explored some of the complexities, so now let's bring it back to some of the basics here. This is directly from the new product blueprinting material. Most of the time, your verbs will be minimize or maximize. We talked about why we think minimize will be the best. Minimize, our unit of measure, and then we have an object or a little bit more information about the context. So that's our most common scenario. And over time, you will recognize the units of measure that tend to work a lot. But I'll tell you this: minimize the time by itself is the one you will see the most often, as time can be a proxy for just lots of things. Number, likelihood, frequency might be the one that occurs to me after these. But some things naturally lend themselves to a certain measurable. Like if it's noise level, then it's going to be something about decibels. If you're in a chemical industry, there'll be things I don't know about. Dan could elaborate on. I don't know things of
impurities, parts per million of impurities.
There you go. Yeah. I've kind of recently become obsessed with ultralight backpacking gear. And so obviously weight is a thing, but beyond that, waterproofness. And it turns out that's a very measurable thing. But anyway, so depending on the context, there may be also a very specific measurable thing. Now, before I move on, I want to look at just some common errors folks make. But before I do that, any questions about anything so far? All right, we will roll on. So some common errors. And again, if you find your preference interviews feel a little awkward and the customers are having a hard time with understanding your preference interview questions, that's a definite sign that you might have made a few of these errors. So Dan mentioned these from Blue Help. You get these vague words. We used to call these the UBLs: durable, reliable, scalable, comfortable. This easy to use slips up in there a lot. Maximize ease of use. The problem with these is they sound good. We think we know what they mean, but that's because in our own brains, they mean something to us. But remember, one of the minimum requirements is everybody has to interpret it the same. So if your car is reliable, what does that mean? Does that mean it starts every time, or it never leaves you on the side of the road? So when a customer says, I want something to be durable, reliable, what do we do? Well, we ask for the imperfection. We ask for the imperfection. They've described what they want. They want it to be durable. So we ask them, what is making it not durable? Okay. They say they want it to be reliable. We ask, what is making it not reliable? They say they want it to be comfortable. In the tractor business, you get into this a lot, I can tell you. What makes it uncomfortable? They say they want it to be easy to use. What makes it difficult to use? And so when a customer says one of these vague words, it's get excited, because in their brains, they know what they're thinking of. They have an error in mind. And you're very close to what the actual issue is. They say they want to be durable. You ask them, what is making it not durable? So you're very close.
And Scott, this comes back to Kevin's question. I want to cross the river fast. I want to minimize the time. What's slowing you down? What's keeping you from crossing the river fast? Exactly. And the other thing that I think you and I have noticed is once they give you the answer to that, don't just stop there. Say, is there anything else that's slowing you down in crossing the river? There may be 5 different things that lead to this not being durable or not being reliable. So get the first one. And then if you get another reason why they can't cross the river fast, go to the next sticky note and keep recording. You can have several. In fact, you can think about this way. Think about diverging. If you get the word durable, diverge to all the things they mean by durable. And then later you can converge on the ones that may be the top picks, the most important.
Yep, 100%. It's funny, when folks are taking blueprinting training for the first time, they have this very unfounded fear that customers are not going to say anything. They're going to they're not, what if they don't say anything? Then what questions do I ask? Look, if you are studying the job of crossing the river and you have people in a room who daily or who have that task to cross the river, I promise you, they will have plenty of experience and they'll have plenty of issues of the challenges they have crossing that river. If they are having trouble answering that questions, you probably don't have the people there who are crossing the river. It's a sign about, a little indicator about your folks. If you have the right folks there, they will have no trouble answering any of these. And just like Dan said, embrace it as a brainstorming event, because if you have folks from marketing and engineering, one of them might say, yeah, this needs to be easy to use. And marketing might have one thing in their mind and engineering might have another thing, but they were all in agreement on the easy to use. And so that's the problem with these positive words, is they're a little bit more open to interpretation. When we get to these root cause, what makes it not durable, not reliable, what makes it difficult to use, that gets us to the core, the root of the matter. So when a customer says one of these things, you're like a bulldog, like chewing on a leg, get real excited. Now, here's another one. Using ability. So again, these are common errors. Using ability as a metric. And the problem is these outcomes sound good. They sound like, they said, minimize the ability to book a flight. That sounds pretty good. Maximize the ability to install the app. Well, the challenge with this is ability is not really that measurable. And what we actually have here is, behind this, we have a job statement. They want to book the flight. They want to install the app. They want to upgrade the app, right? So it's almost like this is our job to be done again. And so instead of just letting them get it by with maximize the ability to book a flight, go deeper into these job statements for book a flight. And so then back to our blueprinting thinking process. What's that first blueprint or the second blueprinting step about problems? What problems do you encounter when booking a flight? This is our job. This is our job to be done. Book a flight. Just like what problems do you have when booking a flight? And you can even ask what makes it more difficult, what makes it slow, frustrating, etc. So that again gets us back to that root core. It was just not enough to leave it at maximize the ability. That's the problem with this one, is it sounds like a good outcome, but I want to encourage you to push a little further, because if we have maximize the ability to book a flight, we really just, all we really have is book a flight. We've kind of forced this ability as a metric into the outcome syntax so that it looks like one. All right, so that's a common one. A couple more. To solution like. To solution like. This is a tricky one. This can be very tricky. Sometimes you'll have an outcome that says maximize the amount of training. You'll see that, which sounds like a great outcome. Minimize the time to read the instructions. That sounds like a good outcome. I want to read that quickly. The challenge is these instructions have snuck in here as a solution. What's the reason for the instructions? What job are the instructions helping us to accomplish? Well, we just got to ask why one more time. If you could read them faster, how would that help you? It's just back to what Dan shared a while ago. Anytime a customer provides a solution, they want a button, they want Bluetooth enabled, they want the device to communicate with the cloud. It's the exact same thing. How could that help you, or what would that help you to accomplish? In this case, minimize the time to learn to use the app. And so these, I'll be honest with you, sometimes these take a little bit of experience to be able to spot, but then that's a great thing where you and your colleagues on a project team, you can help each other. And here's something I'd recommend. If within your company, if you've got different blueprinting teams, read each other's, it's like you're editing each other's paper. You know, if you're on the lawn tractor team, another project team is on the stand-up mower team or the robotic mower team. You know, as the robotic mower team, read the lawn tractor's team's outcomes, give them feedback, and vice versa, because you'll know the context enough, and that way you'll be able to help each other to see some of these little solutions that I've just snuck right into your statements. Now this one, sometimes we can drift out of scope, but we don't even realize we've done it. So I'll throw this out to the group. We're doing okay on time here. Is there one of these four statements that's not like the other? I'm not even saying it's bad, but it's definitely different. So we have minimize the time to mow the lawn, minimize the likelihood of leaving streaks uncut, minimize the likelihood of damaging while turning, and minimize the lead time from the factory.
I'd say the last one.
Tell me about what, yes, you're correct. It's the last one. How is this one different?
Because that's not related to the job of cutting the grass.
It's not related to the job of mowing the grass. That's right. And that's why I say it's not good or bad per se. It just depends on what the goals of your project are. So this has to do, if you are on a project team and you're designing a new mower, or if you're looking at improving that job of mowing the grass, this will not impact it at all. So it just depends on the scope of your project. So you just want to be really crystal. Again, I can't look at this and even know if it's good or bad. It depends what the scope of the project is. If the scope was to improve the customer's ability to mow the lawn, then this one should not be there. So it just depends. But great. But sorry, I don't know all the voices, but A+.
Steve.
From that, yeah. And by the way, in B2B, you see this all the time. They sneak in. And you know what? It might be worth considering, hey, did we, maybe we scope the project at mowing the lawn. Maybe it should be more broad. Or should we have two projects? One project on mowing the lawn and another project essentially on doing business with us, in which you would have lead time and customer support and warranty support. Maybe you have all those together. But generally, you don't want those intermingled. So absolutely. Now, here's one that comes up. And what about outcomes about price or cost? It's not bad per se, but I'm going to recommend that you actually avoid outcomes like this one. Minimize the cost of a new mower. And again, it meets all our definitions. It meets it's concise, it's clear, everything about it meets our definition. So why am I suggesting we avoid it? Well, first of all, it's not that insightful. We already know they want to pay less. So as a outcome itself, we have that already. But really, honestly, it's just, I wish I'd put this number 2 as number 1. Because I think this is the bigger reason. There's just usually something more interesting to learn. Remember, within blueprinting, right now, we're only prioritizing 10 things, 10 outcomes. So each one is incredibly valued. And I would be shocked if there's not something more interesting that we need to learn, other than they'll be happier if they're, I should say, paying less. If we can find some customers that are happy or paying more, we should get those. Now, a couple other reasons. Pricing is a strategic decision, right? So the actual pricing you might make, it'll actually relate to your goals. Are you looking to penetrate a new market, or are you looking to increase market share or extract more profit? So that'll play into it. And you're going to certainly do pricing comparison with your competition anyway. So there'll be so I'm not going to say don't ever do it, but I would really challenge you to try to not do minimize the cost.
And Scott, would you say that, if the customer brings it up in the interview discovery, go ahead and put it up there. You don't want to, insult them. But when you're selecting your outcomes for preference interview, it's probably pretty unlikely that this will be one of the 10.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. That's a very important clarification. If the customer mentions that, you don't signal that anything's off. Just keep going. You might understand some of the, probe deeply to help to understand how the cost causes them issues or whatever. A lot of times, if you hear that, it's from the procurement person who's sitting in the room. They don't have anything else to say.
Right.
So yes, just feel free to probe and capture it. In practice, I would probably encourage you not to spend a lot of time on it, and just to get onto some things that are, again, back to this point number 2, things that are more interesting to learn, right? All right. So with that, any questions about any of that? And then we're going to, as a group, well, first of all, we'll see if there's any questions, and then I've got some outcomes for us to look at together.
And as you're thinking about any questions you've got, let me also throw this out there. We always want to make sure that on these Monday master classes, if you've come with some specific questions that are even outside the scope of our topic, we want to make sure we handle those. So We're going to wrap up with a little exercise, which I think you're going to find very valuable. But if you came here thinking, oh, I had a question I wanted to ask you guys, you either go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in, and it could be about anything. It could be about a market case or preference interview, or you can put it in the chat. We want to make sure we cover those as well. Okay?
Yeah, and maybe we should just take a minute for that. I'll stop sharing. So what we can do. Well, I'll share back again. But it's kind of look at these outcomes and edit them, if you will. But before we do that, I think I think you're right. Am I sharing the screen correctly?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
So any questions about anything before we look at this? We'll just take a minute. Again, as Dan said, about outcomes or anything.
Hey, Scott, this is Edward. Just a quick question on that last point about pricing. We're talking mainly about B2B markets, where I think the bigger issue is not their out-of-pocket money for buying the solution, but more could be cost of operations. How would you differentiate between the two in your questioning?
I think it just really comes to the scope of my project as to whether that's in or not. So I don't have an answer across the board. I think my immediate thinking is that, if your project is all about understanding that, then it would be fine. In general, I can't think of many times though in practice where I could not find a lot more interesting things than.
Okay.
Sometimes, one thing that I've noticed, so we have a scope, we like to stay in it. And then sometimes there will be something that'll be a little bit tangential. A little bit of probing can sometimes reveal some things. So if you get some cost of ownership issues, it's good maybe to probe a little bit on that beyond the initial cost, because there may be something that pops up that go, oh, we need to talk about this more. So it's always good to explore a little bit, but that would be the only thing I would add to that.
It's funny, Danny, with a moment to think, I should have thought of one step before I answered that initial question, because I'm actually thinking about sometimes where customers would say, "Oh, the total cost of ownership." I'll just go back to the mower as for to keep with our example. "Oh, that's too high." You probe a little more, and you learn that it's very time consuming to maintain. So their words were the cost, but that's because they were thinking of the technician's time to do this and that. But in that case, the quote cost was really a proxy for a problem, meaning something was difficult to maintain or whatever. So I'm going to retract my statement about the total cost of ownership, because in practice I'm actually recalling where that was very useful to uncover more things.
Hey, and Scott, that was a great question, Edward. Thank you. And we got a good question from Kevin here. He said, "I would like to include team members in discovery interviews as a note taker or as an observer that have not taken the training. What resource would you recommend to bring them up to speed?" Do you mind if I grab the controls just for a little bit here?
Sure.
So here's what I would do. First of all, there's two things that I think I would go with. Let me just go ahead and share my screen here and get out of this for a moment. Let's go back to the AIM Client Center. Now, I know this AIM Client Center is just for people who are subscribers, but hang in there with me, because you can go to Blue Tools here, and when you get to the Blue Tools, there is a link, we call it Blueprinting for Sales. So that's the first thing that I would send them, that link. Anybody can go to this, and it'll take about 45 minutes to go through the videos and so forth. So that's good background for them. But now here's a little secret, don't tell anybody else. But the Blue Help section, actually this is not within the password firewall, okay? So what I would do on this one is I would probably send them 3 links. I'd go to Discovery Interviews here, and then within see over here how to plan, preparing, if I scroll down, it's kind of funky, but look on the left side over here, there it goes. It takes a while to get this going. If you start looking here, there's one section called How to Conduct a Discovery Interview. I'm going to click on that, okay? There you have it. There are 3 articles in here. You know what I do? I would go ahead and I'd click on that article, and I'd copy and paste that link and send it to them. And it talks about the final preparations before the interview. And then I'd come back here under How to Conduct, tips for conducting each part. Well, wouldn't that be nice if your observers and note takers had that? So they'll have all these nice tips right in here in the whole thing. And then I'd probably also send them the link, Avoid These Beginner's Errors. There's a bunch of beginner's errors, 9 of them we've got in here. So I think that's what I would do. Send them to blueprintingforsales.com, and then go out to your Blue Help, look for Conducting Discovery Interviews. It's under Step 2. And under How to Conduct, there's 3 articles. Frankly, if they read those 3, they're going to be in really good shape to dive in on these interviews with you. And thank you. Somebody mentioned the book. That's not too bad. If they've got a lot of stamina, they could read the book too. All right. Great questions. Any other questions that we've got? I'll stop sharing here.
And by the way, also the premise of the question: somebody has not been trained. Look, with the situation, along with every other training company, we've gone to virtual training. It's never, literally, I sound like an infomercial now, but I'll just do it. It's never been easier, but it really hasn't, to take blueprint training. We're offering it, 1 to 2 times a month. Dan, while you're sharing, maybe you can just,
let's go there. That's a really good point. It used to be to get somebody trained, it was like a couple $1,000. Now you can go out to training, blueprinting training, and go down to public blueprinting workshops virtual, okay? And, this is a great point. For about $395, they'll get like 2 4-hour virtual sessions. They'll get the software for 30 days. They don't have to, if they want to keep it, they can spend more money, but they can just let it lapse. They would have fantastic training. So I guess Blue Tools would be Blueprinting for Sales would be the easiest. Then send them the 3 links under Blue Help. And if they want to really get trained up well, have them hit one of these workshops. And they don't need the software for any of those things. Good catch. Good. Other questions or observations? Well, Scott, why don't you go ahead and show us a little bit on that? We'll wrap it up. We'll head down the home stretch on Scott's outcomes.
Yeah. I call this bad outcomes, but they're not necessarily all bad. I will say they're typical of the kind of things that a person might see. All right, so you can see I've got, again, some of these are better than others, but anybody like to raise their hand and we'll pick on one of these and see how we might improve it, or tell us what's wrong with it or how it could be improved? Oh, I'll give a little context on this example. This is just one I made. Imagine that you make hydraulic pumps and you are selling them to companies that make zero turn radius mowers. So you make the pumps, and so these are drives the hydraulics within a mower.
I would say a lot of the outcomes need some help.
All right. Anyone come to mind you want to pick on?
Yeah, minimize the cost of the pump.
There you go. Yep, we talked about that one. Yep. So in this case, the outcome's fine. We just probably would not select it as a top pick, but right.
And, you know, if your purchasing agent throws that one up in the very beginning of the interview, you know, you want to set a tone of really being a good listener and so forth. So, you know, I would probably ask a question like, you know, how does, you know, the cost impact you? You know, they might say, oh, we could do some different things. If it was lower cost, we could get in different applications. It's always good to, you know, kind of set that tone. But you're right, probably you wouldn't use the outcome statement, but, you know, you can probe a little bit on it.
We have a project that we're close to wrapping up, and one of the key drivers we keep hearing from the customer base is the total cost of ownership.
Yeah. That would be a great probing question, wouldn't it? When you say cost, can you tell me, obviously there's the purchase price. Are there other costs involved? That'd be a pretty good thing to chase down, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and we got, I think, three elements that drive that. One's the initial cost of the product, the cost that the product kind of failure modes of adjacent equipment.
Oh, interesting.
And then the third one was inspection costs.
Now, see, that's really, really good, Steve. That you just made a great point here. If we would have stopped and go, oh, it's cost, let's move on. I don't think I would have thought about failure of adjacent equipment, and I don't think I would have thought about the inspection costs.
Yeah, when I heard inspection costs, I got my bulldog instinct turned on, because there's why is that costly? What's going on there? When I hear costly, I hear time consuming.
Scott, could you click on note number 12? And you know, this would be a good time. Let's say Scott put down initial cost, and then, you know, the next thing, if you type, you know, could be cost damage to adjacent equipment, and then the last one could be inspection cost. If you found these, you probably would then want to separate those out. And so this is where, you guys may know this already, but you can highlight this, release your grip, and then just copy this, move it to the next empty note. So those are really good to kind of break those out, so you can do a little more probing on each one of those. Good one, Steve.
Yeah, good one.
Anybody see any other ones?
What about this one? What are your thoughts on this one? Minimize the training time for new employees to install a pump. It meets all the definitions, fine.
Seems like there's two jobs there.
What are they?
One is employee training, and then pump installation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. New employees. So we have a market here. We have a what, we have a who, and a what. We have new employees installing pumps. And what we have here is we want to know what makes it difficult for this for this group of people to do this, to install pumps, right? So then there's your question. What are the problems new employees have when installing pumps? And it's almost like, imagine, so we have our scope here, hydraulic pumps and zero-turn mowers. Imagine you've got like a little blueprinting project, but instead it says installing pumps. And you can say, what problems do you have when installing pumps, etc. I've lost where that one went. Right here. Yeah. So so all the maybe these things are heavy, whatever. You need to know electrical stuff, whatever. Yeah. The thing is training time. So great observation. And that we actually have a job statement we want to dig into, and it turns out that training time actually is a solution. Look, if we could make it easier to install, do we even have to have training at all? I mean, think how Apple has trained us to expect to take a phone out and just know how to use it, right? That's kind of sets the standard. So so great observation there. In this case, this is a bit of a solutions kind of hidden in here, in that our training is a solution. I'm not going to tell you it's a terrible outcome, but it's one that I would question a little bit and just see if I can get it to be better by understanding what makes it difficult to install the pump. And so, by the way, that reminds me of a point. None of this is about perfection. It's an exercise in writing. I'm sure you could have lots of these outcomes and have a fantastic project still, because we're still getting good customer insight. But this is the masterclass series, right? So this is about taking it one step further, not just the bare minimum, but how can we really reach for excellence?
I think that's a really good point, Scott. You could have a bunch of masters in the interview, and they're not going to all have exactly the same outcome statement. So don't feel like, oh, that's wrong or this is right. It's a matter of just getting improved outcome statements. And I know we're ready to close it up here, but for me, I think what was really helpful in your book was to think about that statue, David. There's a job to be done. At some point, you're going to put away your chisel and your sandpaper. I mean, David is done, okay? Now, we may never find, any job to be done that our customers have that's that good, that's that close to perfection, but what's preventing it? And then I think just being curious. I mean, we just talked about here. There's lots of questions here. Let's be curious. What do you mean by durability? What do you mean by reliability? What's preventing it from being durable? It doesn't have to be perfect questions, but you're curious about that job to be done and how you can eliminate some imperfection to get closer to the perfect job to be done.
Yeah, I'm glad you found that to be useful, because that was definitely, excuse me, kind of something that helped me. And as we are getting here to the end, I do want to come back around to that. So it's like this pursuit of getting these outcomes better, but don't be intimidated by it. Dan just said a very important thing in that it's about being curious. I truly believe your best is good enough. If you're there with your customers and you're legitimately trying to understand what their challenges are, your project will do fantastic, even if you have some of these outcomes that I might pick on a little bit. But it's not about having these absolutely perfect. But get them, if you're with your customers, you're curious about their challenges, I promise you, your best will be good enough. We're just trying to help you get one level higher, which also is one thing that can save you. If let's just say we have this, I don't personally like this one because it maximizes the ability to install the pumps. But if you have lots in blueprinting, we encourage you to have all this contextual information. If you have really good contextual information here about these will be details about the challenges. This can really help your project to still do quite well, even if technically the outcome statement could have been improved a little bit. But if you've got the details within this note, lots of information in that note, then that will really help you to still excel anyway.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you. This has been a really great masterclass. Lots of great learning for all of us. It'll be recorded, so folks, you can check it out later. And we should sign off now, but in 2 more weeks, we got another masterclass. It's going to be on something called SALT. It's a method of probing we don't get into. So talking about really probing well, I think you're going to really like this method called SALT. We used to only teach to blue belts and advanced classes, but we're going to start sharing that with everybody. And you'll have a nice handout to take home with you after that one as well. So I think we can close it out, Scott. I think we're good.
Great. Yes. Thank you, everybody. It's been fun.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the week, and drop us an email if you've got any questions, okay?